welcome to the Wildline Podcast. I am your host, Dan. This is a new podcast about movies. I guess it's not so new anymore. It's becoming not so new. I don't even know what the week this is for me, maybe the third week. In any event, this is a podcast about movies and how much money they make at the box office. So this is going to be our prediction show for this weekend here. We have three new openers. We have Arrival. We have, what is this Christmas movie called? Almost Christmas. And then we have Shut In, the Naomi Watts horror film coming out from, I guess, an indie distributor. We'll get into that later. In any event, let's talk a little bit about Arrival. So a little lowdown here, what we're going to do. We're just going to walk through these three wide release openers that have technically already opened. I'm recording this at about midnight Thursday, now Friday. So all three of these movies have started their previews already. There's no numbers out, so I'm not cheating. The numbers will come out. If you are a nerd, you know that the Thursday preview numbers come out Friday morning at about 10 a.m. East Coast, sometimes 10:30. So these movies are out. So what we're going to do is talk about what we think they're going to do over the weekend and sort of run down what the industry is saying for these films, and then also some comparable films that have been released in the past that might give us some indication of how these movies will perform. So let's get on with the show. So the first movie coming out, the biggest, I think, release, and I think will do the best, is Arrival. Arrival is a sci-fi movie starring Amy Adams. It's basically an alien, I guess not really an alien invasion film, just a sci-fi movie about aliens coming to the Earth, and it doesn't really have a war feel to it when you're looking at the trailer. It seems sort of like almost like Contact, which is a great movie that was released in the mid-90s. Jodie Foster was the lead of Contact, I forgot about that. Which is one of those movies that, I saw growing up. I was probably around 12, 13 when it came out, and I saw it in the theaters, and I really enjoyed it. It was a really interesting film, and it's been on like pay cable a lot over the last couple of months, and wow, it has really stood the test of time. Just a really well done film about sort of the first contact we have with an alien race or universe or whatever you want to call it. So what is Arrival going to do? It's a sci-fi movie. It's from the director of Sicario, which came out last year, which was fantastic. It has, just from a general sort of vibe of the film, it seems a little bit more artistic based, sort of like an arty film that is being released as a wide sort of blockbuster release. It's only going to be on 2,300 screens, so I guess they're just sort of testing the waters with it. Normally a film like this, because it's from this director, the Sicario director, which did pretty well on a wide release last year, that film also sort of walked this line in between art house film and wide release kind of blockbuster-esque film. It's kind of a weird no man's land, and Sicario, I think, almost succumbed to that a little bit. It was amazing. There's so many amazing scenes in that movie, but I did feel that sometimes it felt like an art movie trying to be an action blockbuster, and then sometimes it felt like an action blockbuster trying to be an art film, specifically when you get to the end of Sicario. So we'll see how Arrival sort of balances that, those two polar opposites, with this wide release on 2,300 screens this weekend. So the industry is saying, the industry estimates are saying low to mid-teens for Arrival. Box Office Mojo is saying $25 million for Arrival. That's pretty high. Hollywood Reporter is coming in at mid to high teens. IndieWire is saying 12 to 18 million. They sort of said probably closer to 18 million. Entertainment Weekly is saying 18 million. And I bashed on Entertainment Weekly, I guess it was last week for Trolls, and they said 50 million. I was like, there's no way this film's doing 50 million. Well, of course, Entertainment Weekly was the closest and the only one to say that it was ever going to get above the mid or to low 40s. So I trust Entertainment Weekly a lot more than I did last week. So a couple of comparable films to take a look at here. The first one that sort of popped into my head, because Arrival is an alien sort of invasion film, was Fifth Wave, which I believe came out this March. Was not marketed very well. Fifth Wave was also based on a young adult novel. It just did not do great. So Fifth Wave opened up at 10 million. had a per theater average of about $3,500. So projected out, if Arrival did that same number on its 2,300 screens, we're talking about $8.1 million for Arrival. I feel like that's too low. I feel like Arrival has a lot more buzz to it. I can't remember why this movie became so buzzy either, to be honest with you. I don't know if it was maybe Sundance or something. I felt like it came out of one of the festivals with a lot of great hype behind it. I was hyped about it just because of the director. And I like Amy Adams. I feel like sometimes she gets put in roles that don't work for her. But I think overall she's a great actress. So I don't think it's going to do, I think it's going to do more than that $8.1 million that Fifth Wave, if it did the same thing as Fifth Wave did. Another one is War of the Worlds. I know it came out a while ago. I don't even know when it came out. A long time ago now. That did $64 million opening weekend, $16K per theater average. If Arrival did the same on its number of screens with that PTA, it would come in at $37 million. I don't see that happening at all. So, definitely higher than 8, a little bit lower, definitely lower than 37. The other movie that sort of stuck out to me as a possible comparable to Arrival would be Children of Men. I don't know why. I just like Arrival has this sort of dark, naturalistic, almost British feel to it. And that just reminded me a lot of the style and look of Children of Men, kind of an intellectual sci-fi movie. And Children of Men opened up at 10.1 million with a PTA of 8.4K. So if Arrival did a similar number to that in terms of its theater average, you're looking at about 19.4 million. That feels pretty close to what I think this thing's gonna do. So maybe on the low end for Arrival, I would say a 6,000 per theater average, and that would put it at $13 million. And on the high end, I'm thinking it might do, well, I don't even know. I think maybe like the high 20s would be its sort of cap out range here where the ceiling is. I think its per theater average is going to be, a little bit higher than Children of Men, which was about 8,000. So I'm thinking to say like $9,000 for per theater average for Arrival, and that would put it at $20.8 million. So I think this movie is going to do fairly well. The Rotten Tomato score, I believe, was 100% there for a while, but I think it's dropped down to 98 right now, which is, that's fantastic. I think at the end of the day, critics love this film. I do think it is like Sicario. It's down at 96 now. Ooh, those 6 people gave it a rotten score. I do get the feeling that it may not do super, super well and jump into those mid to high 20s just because it doesn't really have a pop. It doesn't have pop appeal. It doesn't have any doesn't feel like a Transformers type movie or anything like that. It doesn't really have that mass appeal hook to it. It does seem like a very cerebral, artistic film, and I think that actually will cap its audience out at a certain level. So I'm thinking probably low 20s, 20.8 million is my exact guess on that one. And I'll say as an aside, just from a movie lover's sort of perspective, this is one of my most exciting movies. One of the movies I want to see the most this year. It looks fantastic. I love the director. I love Sicario. I thought it was so fascinating. I'm super psyched to see this movie. So I hope it does do well, and I think its legs will be decent. It's going to run into Beast next week, which is a juggernaut, and a couple other movies coming out. So let's move on to the other big opener this week, which will be Almost Christmas. This is just your typical Christmas movie. It is geared towards African Americans, so it's definitely a demo picture. It's really targeted that group of people. And so that does a couple of things to it. Like a normal Christmas movie it also feels like pretty early for a Christmas movie to me. I just don't see what the point of opening a Christmas movie is on November 11th. But, I could be wrong. You just never know. The industry is saying a couple things for this film. Universal, who's making this movie, they've sort of said, we expect it to do about the low to mid teens. Other industry sort of analysts have said 9 to 15 million for Almost Christmas. Box Office Mojo said 12 million. Hollywood Reporter said low to mid teens. IndieWire said mid to high teens. Those all sort of seem in the ballpark to me. I don't see anything outrageous there. It's hard to, things have changed now, right? If there's, in the past, when there was a movie that seemed to be geared directly towards the African American demographic, you always kind of felt like there was a cap on its per theater average. Like, it's just not going to pop off that much. But I think this fall has sort of changed our perspective a bit with Bua Medea Halloween, a film that I expected to do well and then fall off the face of the earth. It just, it won those 2 weekends, its first 2 weekends. It beat out Jack Reacher and really, really overperformed. And I think the most interesting part of that is when ComScore did their post track, and it's just like a survey for films. It showed that the demographic for Boo Medea had changed a lot. It wasn't just African Americans seeing that film. Normally, a Tyler Perry movie has a demographic of about 80 to 90% African American who goes to see it. And that was, I think, mostly true the first weekend of Boo Medea Halloween. But in the second weekend, I believe the African American demo became the minority of the people seeing the film. Really fascinating stuff. So I wonder if Almost Christmas will have that same sort of diversification of its audience. I'm not sure. It does seem pretty geared toward the African American demographic, and I don't know if there's going to be a lot of crossover outside of that. A couple of comparables. Speaking of Medea, there was a Medea Christmas that opened to $16 million with a per theater average of about $7,000. Now, if Almost Christmas does a similar per theater average to that, you're looking at about $17.3 million for Almost Christmas. Then there was This Christmas, which I don't know when that came out, but it's pretty recent. Also, a Christmas movie geared at the African American demo that opened at $18 million with a 9.6K per theater average. Now, if Almost Christmas did a similar PTA on that, it would open up at $22.7 million. That seems pretty high to me. I mean, the Medea seems a little bit more realistic. I don't know what it was about This Christmas how it did so well. And then finally, The Best Man Holiday that opened at $30 million with about a 15K per theater average. And if Almost Christmas does that same average, you're looking at about $35 million. And Almost Christmas is opening up at 2,300 screens, about almost 2,400 screens to be exact. So, definitely mid-teen seems about right. I think on the low end, it's hard to gauge with the Medea movie coming out a few weeks ago. I made the mistake of thinking that because the Kevin Hart movie opened up, I think the week before Boo, that the African American demo was going to go see the Kevin Hart film and maybe not go see Medea because most Americans or Americans and Canadians to be exact, the domestic market, they only go to movies about 4 to 5 times a year. So it seemed like maybe the Medea thing would get some of its bite taken out of it by the Kevin Hart movie open up the week before. So is the Medea movie going to take something out of this Almost Christmas film? I have a hard time thinking that it will. Just because if you want to go see a Christmas movie in the middle of November, you're just gonna go. Like, you're not gonna sort of wait until a month from now to go see it. So I don't think the Medea, the great performance of Boo Medea is really gonna bite that much into this. But I think on the low end, you're talking probably at least 4,000 per theater here. And that would put Almost Christmas at $9.5 million. And I think on the high end, you're looking at somewhere where This Christmas was about $9,000 per theater. And that will put Almost Christmas at $21 million. I don't feel like that's doable. I just don't. I feel like this movie's just like way too early for a Christmas movie. Like maybe around Thanksgiving I could see, but it's like I'm down in Tennessee and it's like 70 degrees today, 75 degrees. And I was talking to people up in Minnesota and it's like 70 degrees up there. Nobody wants to see a holiday movie now. So I think it's going to do in the middle there. I think it's going to do about 6,000 per theater. And then it's playing on 2372 screens. So at 6,000 per theater, it's going to do $14.2 million. So that would be my guess for that. But you never know. Like it could be like a Medea and then like out of nowhere, just crush like a 12K per theater average, and it's like already way in the 20s then at that point. So that's the second wide opener this week. And last but not least, we have Shut In. And Shut In is, I saw the trailer for it a couple times and I was like, okay, like it's a horror movie. It's listed as a thriller on Box Office Mojo, but it feels a lot more like a horror movie than a thriller. The basic plot, I think, is a woman is living with her son in a very rural area during the winter, and I guess her son is either like bedridden or something, and spooky things start happening, and there's either ghosts of children or some demon of a children haunting her. Naomi Watts is an interesting actress. I sort of first came across her in Mulholland Drive back in 2001, which is 15 years ago now. And then she was also in 21 Grams, which is one of my favorite movies back then. And I was like, like a super nerdy, kind of arty kid. And, I was really into that movie, and she seemed like an actress that was going to always be in these really prestigious kind of arty films. And I don't really know what happened to her career. This is one of my close friends is an actress, and she tells me, or she's told me, that for women, there's this weird like gulf in their life, or in their career, where they go from playing, the beautiful young woman, but when they get to a certain age, it's all of a sudden the work dries up for the beautiful young woman role. And a lot of these actresses kind of get lost. And I wonder if Naomi Watts is sort of there yet. I think she's a very talented actress, but I think she just sort of got typecast because of her looks. It's just sort of like, how sometimes movies just put beautiful women in certain roles and don't really give the character all that much. I think that's happened to her a couple of times. And I actually had to look and see what she's been up to recently. I forgot she was in The Ring. Oh man, yeah, okay. Like that was back in the day though. But now like this connection to the horror film makes a lot more sense. 21 Grams, I Heart Huckabees, which is fantastic. I forgot she was in the sequel to The Ring. King Kong, Inland Empire, Eastern Promises, Funny Games. So you see this pattern of art film, right? A lot of these are art films, like especially like Eastern Promises, and even I Heart Huckabees, which was, I guess, they tried to release that wide. I don't know why. It was absolutely an art film. A little more recently, J. Edgar, Birdman. She was very good in Birdman. I remember that. But then it's just like, I don't know. She was great in St. Vincent too. But St. Vincent was very much a minor, like kind of side part for her. She was in Divergent, which those movies are not going very well. Sea of Trees, which came out, I believe last year. It's supposed to be supposed to be an important film, but it ended up kind of being a dud. That was a Gus Van Sant film with Sean Penn. She just has not been in a lot recently in a lead role. She gets a lot of side roles, it seems like. She still did some of the arty stuff, like while we were young, the Noam Baumbach film that came out in 2014, which was very good. She's always been super busy. It's not like her career's dried up. I just feel like she went from like a lead to a side character, and like now she's a lead, but she's in this film, which I don't know what happened with this film, to be honest with you. It feels like it was just maybe financed or produced from a foreign company, and they're trying to release it here. It's actually produced by Europa Corp, who I actually don't know that much about. They've been in business for about 20 years and are based out of France. Let's see if they've released anything big recently. Well, I don't know. They're 9 Lives they produced. I don't really. Oh, that's the what is it, Kevin Spacey film that I don't think did very well. So they've done a few films. Their Finest they also did this year. I don't really remember that one. The Warrior's Gate, I don't know what that is at all. Oh, Chinese film. So they've been producing stuff, but nothing really big. And I think this film is a perfect example of a movie that is DOA. I don't think this thing's going to do anything at all. I think it's going to be lucky to pass $5 million for the weekend. It is opening wide on 2,050 screens, but there's no marketing behind this at all. None. It's just sort of they're tossing it out the theaters and see what they can soak up. Box Office Mojo says $2.5 to $5 million for this. IndieWire says low to mid single digits, and Entertainment Weekly says $1 to $3 million. Now I want to take a look at some comparables on this one. It's kind of hard, just because it is a horror film, but horror films are usually pretty successful to theaters, especially if they're released wide. But because this is from such a company that's just not widely known and doesn't release a ton of films here in the States, it's hard to judge. So I think one of the movies that comes to mind is The Disappointment Room, which is a film nobody realized was coming out. And then all of a sudden, the week before it came out, it was like, oh, here's some trailers and stuff. That opened at $1.4 million for its opening weekend with a per theater average of sub $1,000, $900 per theater. If Shut In does the same as that per theater, it'll come in at $1.8 million. That's really, really, really bad. And I think that's probably near the basement of what this will do. Gallows was a horror film. Was that released, I guess, last year in 2015 over the summer? It had a little bit of buzz to it, but then people realized it was actually a trashy film. So that had an opening weekend of $22 million and a per theater average of $9,000. If Shut In does the same as that, you're looking at 18.4 million. And this is a really good example of, what happens when a film just doesn't have a huge marketing spend on it. The average wide release film in the United States in the domestic market, the marketing costs alone, I'm not talking about production, I'm talking about just marketing, just buying commercials, just buying web ads, Facebook ads, all that sort of fun stuff. You're looking at just alone $45-50 million at least. It's probably higher than that now. Obviously, for your bigger films like a Star Wars or something like that, it's going to be much higher than that. But for your average wide release, you're talking just $40 million, $50 million at least to market that film. That didn't happen here. And when you don't do that, your per theater average is going to drop significantly. And when that drops, you're going to lose a ton of money, or at least not make a ton of money. And that's the difference between a Gallows, which had a huge marketing spend behind it, and a Disappointment Room, which had a very pitiful marketing spend behind it. Kind of a film, a horror film that came out, God, was it this year maybe? I don't even know. Lazarus Effect. I know it's on Netflix. I watched it on Netflix about a couple weeks ago. That opened at $10.2 million, and its per theater average is 3.8K. And if Shut In did the same as that, it would be $7.8 million for Shut In. I feel like that's still way too high. And Lazarus Effect was your bottom of the barrel type horror film. It was just, let's throw this thing out there. Let's make it for like $10 million, maybe less, and just see what we can make off. I don't know if that was part of the whole Blumhouse group, who is just famous right now for making really successful cheap horror films. But Lazarus Effect just was kind of a middling performance overall. And then another horror film that came out recently, I think it might be a comparable, just to give us an idea, is Blair Witch, which did a huge underperformance at $9.5 million opening weekend and a per theater average of about $3,000. Now, if Shut In did that, you're looking at about 6.1 million. I think that's definitely on the much, much higher end of the possibility here for Shut In. I think, just to give us a ballpark, I think on the low end, I don't see it underperforming Disappointment Room, but it could really, really crash because the marketing's been so terrible. So you could have an $800 per theater average on its opening weekend, and that would give it a $1.6 million opening weekend. On the high end, I'm thinking probably not even as high, not high as $3,000 per theater like Blair Witch. I'm thinking more like a 2.5K, $2,500 per theater average, which would give $5.1 million. I definitely think that's on the higher end, and I don't think it's gonna get there. I'm thinking more for Shut In, about a $1,500 per theater average, ending up at $4 million, and that'll be my projection for that. The reason I say that is Naomi Watts is still a pretty much a famous actress. She hasn't had a ton of really big lead parts recently, but I think people see her and they're like, oh yeah, I know her, I like her. I think she has a pretty positive image. I think people see her and they're like, oh yeah, I'd like to see her in her film. Also in the movie's Oliver Platt, who, if you don't know who he is a great character actor who's been around for a long time. He's in his 50s now. You can remember him from such films as Executive Decision and Lake Placid, among many other films, but that's just the first two that came to my head. He's just a great actor. So he's also in Shut In. So you never know, like, people may see these famous actors and be like, all right, I know these people, like, I'm going to go see this. But the marketing's just been terrible for that. So I'm going to say it's to do about $4 million. So to recap a little bit here, the biggest sort of moneymaker this weekend, I think, is going to be Arrival. Now, again, it's not going to be number one. Doctor Strange is going to definitely take number one again. But the biggest new wide release in terms of money, I think, is going to be Arrival. And I said it's going to do about $20.8 million with a $9,000 per theater average. And then Almost Christmas, I said a $6,000 per theater average, which would put it at $14.2 million. And then finally, Shut In, I said about a $1,500 per theater average. And it will make, I think, around $4 million. If it's lucky, it could actually go a lot lower than that. In any event, that's sort of the predictions for this week. I will be back early next week with a sort of review of this weekend. I'll just walk through the top 10. I'm kind of excited to see if Moonlight, this little art film that has been doing so well, I kind of hope it gets into the top 10 this weekend, but we'll find out next week. Thanks for listening, guys. This has been the Wildline Podcast.